Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So this is my giant toolbox of Raspberry Pi stuff. I would hand these around, but I won't. Okay, so this week marks a decided transition. We are still going to be doing homework stuff on Chapter 2 in resistance circuits. But at this point, this week, I would like to introduce the Raspberry Pi, get started playing with it, talk about soldering, talk about circuits, talk about breadboards, talk about wiring, and all the physical componentry. It's already been an interesting semester here. The kind of course content that we cover gets a lot harder, basically starting next week. Your reading assignment for next week will show you as much. So I would like for you to have at least a little bit of proficiency in resistance-based circuits before we transition on into first order and second order systems, because that's where things start getting a little crazy. So there's not a lot of homework that you can really give with a Raspberry Pi, at least not at your stage where you don't even know what one is yet. But next time I would like for you to, if you have a Raspberry Pi, I would like for you to bring it. Okay, we have a bunch of screens, keyboards. You may need to bring your own mouse because all of our mice are gone. But we do have screens and keyboards here. So, yeah. Now this is a Raspberry Pi. This is a 3B Plus. The reason how you know it's a 3B Plus is because it has an HDMI port on it. Raspberry Pi 4s, which is what this is. I guess I could go grab the one out of my office, and I would hand this around, but I actually have pink eye, so I will not do that to you. The biggest difference between the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, which I remember getting excited when the 3B Plus came out, and the 4 is that the 3B Plus comes with a maximum processing power of 1 gigabyte of RAM. The 4 comes with a minimum processing power of 1 gigabyte of RAM. It can go all the way up to, they did just release an 8 gigabyte model, I think it was last September, okay, which I do have one. It's at home. I'm going to plan on bringing it. The way that the Raspberry Pi works is this runs off of a Linux operating system. Has anybody used Ubuntu before? We got one. Okay. Markers that. So, since only one of you have real experience with a Linux-based operating system, I would pull it up, but I don't have Ubuntu on this computer. I do have Ubuntu on my home computer. Linux is, the beauty of Linux is that everything is command-based. You issue a command, the computer performs the command if it is capable of doing so. You issue a command, you end up spending a lot of time using the command bar, okay? Windows and Mac OS, both of those are more graphical operating systems. You drag a cursor across the screen, you click on something. Now, Ubuntu, which is a derivation of Debian, Raspbian, that's what we're going to be working with on the Raspberry Pi. That is also a derivation of Debian. Both of them are Linux operating systems. It does have a graphical component to it. You actually do have the ability to drag a mouse across the screen, which is why I told you to bring a mouse. But a majority of the work can only be done through the command line. Now, when all of you took CST210 last year, which hopefully everybody did, CST210 operates on the principle that basically Chris teaches the class using Ubuntu. It's an online distribution of Ubuntu that he found. So all of you, believe it or not, actually have had experience in Ubuntu here at Doan. Now, the Raspberry Pi Linux operating system can be a little confusing, which is why I want to have you set it up here in a safe place where I can hold your hand, metaphorically. Okay? A lot of people can get very frustrated by this because these fairly cheap computers, which are easy to replace, there's 10 million of them out in the world, these can also break really easily. This doesn't have quite the rigor of a normal computer. But that said, these can also be extremely reliable. And I enjoy using a Raspberry Pi because until we get into higher power circuits and switching things where you can fry your Pi, which we won't do in this class, but until we get there, you could use this as your desktop computer. It's something where there are people who use these as desktop computers now, and they're much, much cheaper than a laptop or anything else. You can build your own laptop out of it if you really want to. There is a Raspberry Pi integrated into a keyboard, where you plug in the keyboard into a screen and into a power source, and that's it. That's all you need to do. It's kind of cool. My brother wanted to buy me one of those, but then he found out that I have like 10 Pis, so I still wanted one, but whatever. Okay, so to make the Raspberry Pi 4 work, you have no reason to buy or use a 3B Plus, unfortunately. I think I told all of you this when I introduced the Raspberry Pis. If you want to buy a 3B Plus because it's cheap, because you can find it cheaper than 35 bucks, great. Otherwise, you have no reason to buy a 3B Plus. It's more powerful. The graphics processor is better. It has USB 3.0 ports, which communicate information faster than USB 2.0, which the 3B Plus doesn't have. This does have micro HDMI ports on it, 2 of them. And you can come up here and look at this during the break, but I guess I could show the camera. It has 2 micro HDMI ports on it, which do require a special cable. Not everybody just walking around like micro HDMI to HDMI cord. And they don't even sell those at Walmart. You have to order them online, which kind of sucks. But this Pi is, we'll have some fun with it. Mostly what we're going to be using it for, and the reason why we do it, is because it's built off of a Linux-based operating system. This allows you to program directly onto the computer. Okay, it's built for programming. The Pi it's intended to be used as a program-heavy platform. And a lot of people will mess with not just programs on it, but they'll even mess with a Linux distribution on their Pi to make their Pi do some fun things. It's it's interesting how many applications this has. I have a robot in my office, which I would wheel in here, but it weighs like 80 pounds. But the students were controlling it entirely off of a Raspberry Pi. They connected a Raspberry Pi to an Xbox controller, and they would drive it around the hallways. I was actually teaching this class when the students tried driving the robot into this classroom, crashed into a door jamb, and lit it on fire. So it hasn't worked the same ever since. But that is one application. Robotics and Raspberry Pis are being used very closely together now because you can throw a Raspberry Pi in there for cheap, and it's much easier to program than a lot of traditional robotics controllers, which robotics controllers can be very, you have to have this piece and plug this in here. Whereas if you have a Raspberry Pi, it suddenly opens things up a lot more. Raspberry Pis are used for remote security systems. If you can connect it to the internet, then you can stream a video feed using Raspberry Pi actually produces their own camera that integrates well with the 4. But you can stream a video feed to the internet directly from your Pi. You can use Pi-to-Pi connections, and you can actually video chat with somebody using 2 different Pis if you really wanted to. It seems like a lot of effort to do something you can do with your cell phone, but people can do that. You can set this up in your room. There are people who've created intelligent security systems for their homes using Raspberry Pis. There are people who have, man, you just go on YouTube and look up stuff people do with Pis. It's amazing. And actually, we're going to do that. Not too late. But before we get into just watching endless YouTube videos, I want to get you ready for Thursday. Okay? So, on Thursday, like I said, if you have your Pi, I would like you to bring it to class. Okay? To get ready for that day, you're going to have to do something. The thing that's unique about the Raspberry Pi is while this has onboard RAM, if I were to plug this in as is, this would do absolutely nothing. Just it's pull it out of the box, you plug it in, you throw it into a screen, you put power to it, nothing happens. And you say, oh, well, it requires an SD card. So people take their SD cards and they plug them in, and it does nothing. Because what a lot of people don't recognize is that on a computer you have a hard drive, and that hard drive is built into your computer. You can remove it if you really want to, but that contains your operating system. A portion of that hard drive is partitioned for an operating system. Well, this SD card contains the operating system for my Raspberry Pi. In fact, this contains all of the onboard storage memory for the Raspberry Pi. You actually have to configure this to work with your Pi before you ever get your Pi to work. So, the steps to before you can even turn on your Pi, you can get everything hooked up. But before you even turn on your Pi, okay, you have to download the latest version of Raspbian. You have to flash, well, nope, sorry. You have to download a flasher. Not like the kind of flasher that was running on in the field in the Super Bowl. And then you have to flash your SD card. Micro SD card, I should say. Okay? I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to do this in class today. I will expect you to do this if you're bringing your Pi before Thursday, because this can take a couple of hours, and it's hours where you're just sitting and waiting. So if you have some free time and you're, just doing nothing, download Raspbian, download a flasher, flash your micro SD card. I have had some issues with downloading Raspbian before, especially from the official Raspberry Pi website. So if it takes absolutely forever, I have a version of Raspbian that I can give you, or I could probably even, I don't know if I can upload it to this class or not, because it's like 2 gigs. I might try anyways. My version is from last July, the one that I have, but I might try downloading the newest version and throwing it on this class canvas files. I'll do that. I will go ahead and put a link to a Flash program. I use, the program that I use is called Balena Etcher. Basically what this does is it takes a zipped folder and it converts it into an image that can be used as an operating system on your Pi. There are other flashers out there, but that's the one that I am most accustomed to using and the one that I'm going to show you how to use today. So, any questions before we get started and I start showing you how to flash an SD card? No questions. Okay, I'm gonna have to plug it into an HDMI port. Okay. Going to dim the lights in here. Please refrain from closing your eyes for more than 5 minutes at a time. I know it's early. So when you go to ignore the number of tabs I have, all of those are for something. Every one of those. Dang it. You know what? Stop judging me. Gross. I have multiple windows open. It's just even worse. I bumped it, and now, come on. Okay, so if you just look up Raspberry Pi flasher, there's a bunch of different imager, Balena Etcher, Raspberry Pi imager, Win32 disk imager. I mean, you can find a bunch of these. They're not that hard to do. However, I have no idea how to do them. So they're hard enough for me. But I go ahead and I use Balena Etcher. just because. I should probably actually just look up Boolean Etcher. I'll provide a link to this in class. I believe it's, yeah, Boolean.io. You'll download this program. Looks like this. When you actually run it, this is what it looks like. You pick an image, which it can just be a zip folder, which is good because then you download the zipped folder from Raspberry Pi. You select a drive. Make sure that if you have multiple things plugged into your computer, when you flash this, make sure you're flashing the right drive. I don't know how many people have erased their USB flash drives because they accidentally picked the wrong one. It's been a lot of people. So don't make sure you're actually flashing to your micro SD card. Okay. Go back to my desktop. This is what the program looks like. Let's see if I can get it to open. There it is. Like it said, that's it. And then you pick an image, you pick the target, which if you only have, I don't have any USB memory devices plugged into my system right now, or else this would automatically select the micro SD card. But you pick an image, you pick the card, and then you hit the flash button. It can take like half an hour to do this. So you gotta allocate enough time that it can actually get done. But that's fun. So, oops, wrong one. So as far as the Raspberry Pi operating system goes, if you just Raspbian, if you just type in download Raspbian, raspberrypi.org, this is usually where I download it from. I've had some issues with this being super slow. But that's interesting. Apparently they're encouraging you to use the Raspberry Pi imager. Huh. Apparently this possibly that could actually download the operating system for you, which that would be awesome. There's a new version. I should probably download that. Raspberry Pi OS with desktop and recommended software is what you want. It does come with some open source software like OpenOffice, LibreOffice, which is kind of nice, especially if you're using this as a desktop. They're just Ubuntu software that were written specifically for a Linux operating system, but it works well with a Pi because Pi is also a Linux operating system. You go to download this recent version, it'll direct you to the most recent version. Okay, this is actually gonna go quick. There was one time it took me 3 days to download this file. It was a nightmare. I don't know what happened, but I think the server was just really slow that time of year. But I am gonna see if I can upload this file to Canvas. If you want to use the Raspberry Pi OS flasher, I haven't done that yet, but if you want to, go for it. Apparently it works well for all of these. It even has one for Ubuntu, which is ironic because you're flashing a Linux system on a Linux system. But yeah, try to do this before Thursday. And I'm gonna go ahead and end the video stream and we're gonna watch some videos of Raspberry Pi stuff. Just walked all the way over here for no reason. Starting to lose my mind. You see me in